Somewhere on Earth, right now, someone is standing at a graveside. They've brought flowers. They're trying not to cry. Or they've given up trying. In a few minutes, they'll walk away, and the person they loved will stay behind, in the ground, forever. This happens every single day, in nearly every culture on the planet. We dig a hole. We place the body inside. We mark the spot, so we can come back to it. It feels like something humans have always done, something instinctive, but it isn't. For most of the history of life on Earth, when a creature died, it was simply left where it fell. No hole, no marker, no one coming back. So who broke that pattern first? Who looked down at a dead body and decided it deserved something more than being abandoned to the elements? The answer takes us back further than cities, further than farming, further than written language, into caves, into total darkness, to the very edge of what we can still call human. This is the story of the first funeral. Picture the world before burial. Millions of years of hominins being born, living, dying, and leaving nothing behind but bones, scattered by scavengers, bleached by sun, swallowed by soil. A death was just biology switching off. No ceremony, no gathering, no grave. Even today, almost no other animal buries its dead. A herd of elephants might linger near a dead companion, touching the bones with their trunks. A chimpanzee might sit beside a body for hours, but digging a pit, placing a body inside it, and covering it deliberately, that's something else entirely. That takes planning, tools, a reason. Figuring out when that first happened is one of the hardest puzzles in archaeology, because a deliberate grave and an accidental pile of bones can look almost identical after 100,000 years underground. Researchers have to read the smallest clues, the angle of a skeleton, the depth of a pit, whether the limbs were folded with any care at all, or just left where they dropped. The strangest clue of all doesn't even come from our own species. South Africa, the Rising Star Cave System, in a region researchers call the cradle of humankind. To reach its deepest chambers, explorers have to fold their bodies through a vertical crack barely wider than a human rib cage, dropping through total darkness with nothing but a headlamp and a rope. Only a handful of people on Earth are small enough and brave enough to make that climb. The scientists who did it nicknamed themselves the underground astronauts. Deep in those chambers, they found something nobody expected: the remains of a small, strange hominin species called Homo naledi. Its brain was roughly a third the size of ours. Its body was a patchwork of primitive and modern features, like something evolution hadn't finished deciding on, and the bones weren't scattered randomly across the cave floor. Bodies of adults and several children under the age of 13 were found curled into shallow pits, arranged in tight fetal positions, deep in chambers that daylight has never once touched. Homo naledi lived somewhere between 200,000 and 335,000 years ago, long before our own species even existed. If these really are deliberate burials, they are, by a wide margin, the oldest ever discovered. Older than anything done by Neanderthals, older than anything done by us. Nearby, on the cave walls, the same team found deep cross-hatched engravings, carved by hand into the rock, deliberate marks with no practical purpose at all. Not every archaeologist is convinced. Getting a body through passages that narrow would have taken real effort and real intent, which is exactly the researchers' argument. Critics counter that the bodies could have fallen in, washed in, or been dragged there by something else entirely, over tens of thousands of years. The debate is still unresolved, but the discovery cracked open a question nobody had thought to ask before. What if the instinct to do something with our dead is older and stranger than we ever imagined? Older even than modern humans. For a long time, Neanderthals were the punchline of human evolution. Hunched, brutish, incapable of anything we'd call emotion. Then their graves started talking. At La Chapelle aux Saints, in France, and deep inside Shanidar Cave, in the mountains of what is now northern Iraq, archaeologists found something that didn't fit the caveman stereotype at all. Bodies placed deliberately, curled onto their sides, tucked into shallow pits that someone had to dig by hand. Shanidar became the most famous of all of them. Across excavations in the 1950s and 60s, researchers uncovered the remains of at least 10 Neanderthal men, women, and children. Some had clearly been killed by rockfalls from the cave ceiling, sudden, violent, accidental. But others looked completely different, clustered together in the same small patch of cave floor, generation after generation, as if this one spot meant something. One skeleton, labeled Shanidar 4, became legendary. In the soil surrounding the body, researchers found clumps of ancient pollen, from wildflowers like cornflower, yarrow, and grape hyacinth. The theory that followed was almost irresistible. Grieving Neanderthals had gathered flowers from the mountainside and laid them across the body of someone they loved. For decades, that single image, a Neanderthal funeral, covered in flowers, became one of the most powerful arguments that Neanderthals felt something like grief. Then, decades later, a new team studying the cave floor found something that undercut the whole theory. The chamber, it turns out, is full of burrowing bees, and those bees pack pollen into tunnels as they dig through soil. The pattern of the pollen clumps, the researchers argued, looks a lot more like bee burrows than like the remains of decaying flower heads. So, did Neanderthals really bury their dead with flowers? Maybe not. But here's the part the bee debate can't erase. Multiple Neanderthal bodies, at multiple sites, across tens of thousands of years, were still placed in the ground on purpose, positioned with unmistakable, repeated care. The flowers might have been a beautiful mistake. The grief behind the burial itself may still have been real. While Neanderthals were burying their dead across Europe and the Middle East, our own species, Homo sapiens, was quietly doing something strikingly similar. In Qafzeh Cave, in what is now northern Israel, archaeologists uncovered roughly 24 graves. The skeletons inside had been placed on their sides, legs drawn tightly toward the chest, arms folded inward. That exact position shows up again and again at early burial sites. So consistently, it can't be a coincidence. These graves are somewhere around 100,000 years old, among the very earliest confirmed burials of our own species anywhere on Earth. And it wasn't only adults being laid to rest with care. On the coast of what is now Kenya, in a cave called Pondea Saidi, archaeologists found the small, fragile, folded remains of a child no older than 3. They named the child Mtoto, Swahili for child. The tiny body had been placed carefully on its side, knees drawn up, head resting on something soft that has long since rotted away, possibly a pillow. That burial is roughly 78,000 years old, the oldest confirmed deliberate burial found anywhere on the African continent. Whoever buried Mtoto wasn't discarding a body, they were tucking a child in, one last time. For tens of thousands of years after that, burial mostly stayed simple. A body, a shallow pit, maybe a scatter of red ochre. Then, around 34,000 years ago, on the frozen plains of what is now Russia, that pattern exploded into something almost unrecognizable. At a site called Sungir, archaeologists uncovered the grave of an adult man, his body dusted head to toe in red ochre, and covered in roughly 3,000 carefully carved mammoth ivory beads. Each bead alone could take close to an hour to carve by hand. That's thousands of hours of labor, sewn into the clothing of a single dead man. His neck bore an injury that may have killed him suddenly, and no one knows exactly why he was honored so richly. But the most astonishing grave at Sungir doesn't belong to the man at all. It belongs to 2 children, roughly 10 and 12 years old, buried head to head in one narrow grave. Laid between and around them, more than 10,000 ivory beads, dozens of ivory armbands, hundreds of pierced fox teeth, mammoth ivory spears straightened by heat and brute force, carved ornaments, antlers, and human thigh bones placed deliberately across their small chests. By some estimates, the beadwork alone for these 2 children represents more hours of skilled labor than the grown man's entire burial combined. And here's the part that stops researchers cold. Analysis of the children's bones suggests both of them lived with serious physical conditions, conditions that, in a world ruled purely by survival of the fittest, might have made them a burden, not an asset. Their community did the opposite. They gave these 2 children one of the richest funerals found anywhere in the ancient world. Somewhere inside that decision is an idea that still quietly shapes how we grieve today, that a person's worth in death was never only about what they could do while alive. As humans shifted from wandering hunting bands into permanent villages, the relationship between the living and the dead didn't loosen. At Çatalhöyük, a sprawling settlement in what is now Turkey, home to thousands of people roughly 9,000 years ago, Families didn't send their dead somewhere else. They buried them directly beneath the floors of their own houses, under the very platforms where people sat, ate, and slept. Bodies were curled tightly, sometimes bound, and tucked beneath the same rooms where daily life carried on right above them, year after year. Some of the dead received an even stranger treatment. After burial, certain skulls were dug back up, cleaned, coated in plaster, and carefully shaped and painted to resemble the living face of the person they'd once belonged to. Families appear to have kept these plastered skulls close, handled, displayed, lived with for a time, before eventually returning them to the earth. At Çatalhöyük, there was no cemetery on the edge of town, no wall between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Ancestors weren't visited on special occasions. They were lived with, quite literally underfoot, holding up the very floor a family stood on every single day. So why did any of this begin at all? Archaeologists don't fully agree, but a few theories keep surfacing. One is purely practical. Burial keeps scavengers away and keeps a decomposing body from spreading disease through camp, a survival habit that slowly picked up meaning. Another is emotional, grief itself, the bond between a parent and child, or between two people who hunted and starved and survived together, doesn't switch off the moment breathing stops. Burial might simply be love with nowhere left to go. A third points toward belief, a growing sense, spreading through early human minds, that death wasn't necessarily the end, that a body or a spirit might need to be prepared for something beyond it. That single idea, multiplied across thousands of generations, may be the root of nearly every religion that followed. The truth is probably some tangled mixture of all three. Practicality opened the door, grief walked through it, belief built a house on the other side. From a body curled into a pit deep in a South African cave, to flowers that may or may not have been placed by grieving Neanderthal hands, to two children buried like royalty on the Russian steppe, to families sleeping just above the bones of their own ancestors. One thread runs through every single one of these stories. At some point deep in our past, humans decided that death didn't get the final word. A body could be positioned with care, marked, remembered, surrounded by everything a community had to give. Thousands of generations later, we still do some version of the exact same thing. We still choose a spot. We still place flowers. We still come back. So the next time you stand at a graveside, or walk past a quiet cemetery, or watch a funeral scene in a film, you're looking at the tail end of a habit that may be older than our own species. It started in the dark, in a cave, with someone who simply refused to just walk away.